And just a recap of our main story. We are continuing to follow reports coming out of Gaza suggesting that there have been explosions. Palestinian security sources are reporting that. Do stay with BBC News.
Hello again. Tuesday was another very warm day across England and Wales. Temperatures peaked at 27 degrees Celsius. That's just 2 down from the hottest day of the year, which was at the start of the week on Monday. And as I say, England and Wales enjoyed a lot of sunshine. Scotland and Northern Ireland, different story. We had rain, and that band of rain continues to push its way eastwards over the next few hours, whilst weakening, so the rain will become lighter and patchier. Across the board, temperatures staying up into double figures as we head into the first part of Wednesday morning. Now, this front is a cold front, and it's an important one. Very weak. It'll just bring a few patches of rain across northwest England and northwest Wales. Sunny spells for Scotland and Northern Ireland, a few isolated showers. Dry picture for East Wales and most of England with lots of sunshine. But it's this front that separates the fresh air in the northwest from the increasingly humid air across East Wales and England. And big temperature contrasts too. About 18 degrees across the northwest of the UK. Across East Wales and into the heart of England, temperatures well up into the mid-20s, the high 20s in places. But as we head into Wednesday night, the atmosphere will become very volatile and will go bang. Yes, the first batch of thunderstorms, the first batch of quite a few thunderstorms will be working in on Wednesday night, pushing in perhaps across East Wales, certainly getting parts of England, and those storms will tend to clear northeastwards as we go through Thursday, with the weather settling down to a degree. Still fresh air across the northwest, still quite humid across parts of eastern England. Some uncertainty with the temperatures. Depends really how much sunshine we get through some of that high cloud across eastern areas, but it could potentially be a bit warmer than that. On into Friday, well, another batch of storms is going to be heading in from France. Again, it's mainly targeting England. That will tend to push its way northwards as we go through Friday night, with the weather again settling down, calming down to a degree as we head into Saturday. And then we do it all again. Saturday night sees another batch of storms come through. This area of storms is probably going to be a little bit more widespread as it works its way northwards, joining forces with an Atlantic weather front in the west. And that area of rain, thundery at times, will push northwards on Sunday. So we've got several bouts of thunderstorms coming our way over the next few days. The biggest of those could bring, well, nearly a month's worth of rain in just a few hours. Flash flooding is possible.
In this time of great uncertainty, we all have lots of questions. So we're taking them from you, the viewers, and putting them to our political leaders and experts to get some answers.
Question time, Thursday at 10:45.
I am a hugger, and I can't wait to hug my family.
The truth is that senior ministers fell disastrously short of the standards that the public has a right to expect.
They made desperate attempts to find survivors in the remains of the flattened 3-storey house in Gaza.
Why do you do the job that you do?
Have you got your Oscar yet, Christopher?
I believe it arrives in 7 to 10 working days.
The BBC News Channel. More than just the headlines.
The BBC World Service has always been something that has just given me a sense of anchoring wherever you go, that it's always accessible.
BBC World Service has been my compass. We need news that give us facts that doesn't distort our world.
I want news, I want science, I want facts, giving me the information so that I can make up my own mind.
The World Service definitely keeps people informed, and I love it.
Bringing the world closer, the BBC World Service.
This is BBC News, the headlines. US President Biden has arrived in Geneva ahead of his summit with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin on Wednesday. It'll be their first face-to-face meeting since Mr. Biden was elected. Each side has acknowledged that relations are at a new low. Israeli nationalist groups have marched through occupied East Jerusalem or in parts of East Jerusalem. It's an early test for Israel's new government. It risks renewed hostilities with Palestinian factions, which declared a day of rage. An inquiry looking into the unsolved murder of a private investigator more than 30 years ago has concluded that the failure to find Daniel Morgan's killer resulted from a form of institutional corruption within London's Metropolitan Police. The US death toll from the COVID-19 pandemic has passed 600,000, according to data. The US has by far the largest death toll of the pandemic, ahead of Brazil and India. Hello and welcome to our look ahead to what the papers will be bringing us tomorrow. With me are Olivia Utley of The Telegraph and also the political commentator and columnist James Miller. Tomorrow's front pages. Let's start with the Metro. The paper reports on the comment made by NHS England's chief executive that he expects all those over the age of 18 to be able to book a first jab by the end of this week. According to The Telegraph, ministers will be advised against the mass rollout of vaccinations to children until scientists obtain more data on the risks. The Times has been told that NHS workers and care home staff will be legally required to have compulsory vaccinations under plans backed by the Prime Minister. In the Daily Mail, the Met Police is accused of a form of institutional corruption over its failure to solve the murder of a private investigator, Daniel Morgan. The Eye reveals a mental health crisis in the NHS as a controversial scheme has been used to withhold treatment from people who frequently demand help. The FT says that Chancellor Rishi Sunak will have to spend up to £4 billion more on pensioners from next year if he wants to stick to the party's triple lock pledge. Let us begin, and we're going to start with the Daily Mail, which has, I think, a difficult headline, James Miller, for Cressida Dick, rotten to the core about the police force.
Yeah, really interesting that the Mail has gone big on this. They call it the gravest crisis for the Yard since the Stephen Lawrence affair.
Do you agree?
Well, it's certainly interesting in the sense that the Mail got its teeth into the Stephen Lawrence affair and wouldn't let go, and to their credit, and really drove that story. And it sounds like I think they're gunning for Cressida Dick now. Certainly the report that came out today into the death of Daniel Morgan is it's awful. It's an awful story from beginning to end. A man died, ultimately, is how it starts, but it's then followed by corruption, incompetence. What's remarkable is that carried on up to the present day, according to the report, that the Met tried to stop the inquiry getting hold of important documents. It's a huge story. It ought to be on the front of all the papers. But there is, of course, another angle to it, which is that corruption was also being carried out by certain newspapers. I mean, News of the World is implicated in all this. Of course, they're no longer with us as a title, but it would be interesting to see how this develops. And it's very interesting that the Mail, obviously one of the biggest selling newspapers, has decided to go big on it. They've gone big on the police angle because that is the obvious one. But if this carries on, the journalism side of it is going to have to be looked into as well.
Olivia Utley, a little earlier, you said this was like something out of Line of Duty.
Yeah, it feels like it is. I mean, it's absolutely shocking how high up this seemed to go. The Met Commissioner was involved. It's staggering, and it really wasn't that long ago. And what's so kind of incredible to read is that so many of the people who were involved then are still there now. And as James says, this has been going on and on and on. It wasn't one case of dodgy details or a dodgy dossier or anything. It's been going on for years. And the fact that this case, this report has dragged on for 8 years is another horrible element of it. It sounds as though we'll have to wait for more details to come out, but the Met have been covering up the mistakes that they made back then and the corruption back then. So
does it really take 8 years to get documents from the police?
Well, absolutely. And now we've got this pathetic response from the Met, sort of denying everything and just pretending that this report hasn't happened. And I think the public's getting quite sick of these, incredibly expensive, valuable reports, which take years and years and years to go through. And then they're just resolutely ignored by everyone denying any sort of accountability at all. And then you sort of think, what's the point of it?
The Times also has this story on its front page on a column on the right. Dame Cressida Dick was forced to apologise yesterday, Met accused of corruption over murder investigation. James Miller, the family of Daniel Morgan has said she should consider her position. Should she?
Yeah, I mean, she not just this. Obviously, she's overseen a number of blunders, going right back to the Jean-Charles de Menezes killing back, that's 2007. So she certainly should consider her position. I suspect she's not going to, because she has the backing of the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister, apparently. So she looks fairly safe. But I say that Daily Mail front page in particular, I think, might have more of a bearing on her future. But yeah, I mean, the interesting phase in that Time story is the Met's culture of self-protection. And of course, that really stood out for me because, another profession that has a perhaps culture of self-protection sometimes is journalism, and the Times is a Murdoch newspaper, and the Murdoch press is implicated in all this. So it'll be very interesting to see how it plays out.
Your thoughts on Dame Cressida Dick, Olivia?
Yeah, as James says, as we've discussed, she has presided over quite a long series of errors. I think that the Met policing, I mean, most recently, for example, the Sarah Everard vigil was far too heavy-handed, and some of the Extinction Rebellion vigils, protest, the policing was far too light. We've got that case yesterday of Nicholas Watt, the BBC Newsnight journalist, police not stepping in when he was descended on by a mob. I mean, I know Cressida can't be held personally responsible for each of these, but, you know, the buck stops with her, and it does just seem to be a few too many things. But as James says, the government and the Mayor of London just come out with this knee-jerk reaction of supporting her all the way, which seems bizarre in light of this incredibly expensive and incredibly long-winded report. Why do it if you're not going to pay attention to it?
We're going to look at another story on the front page of the Times, which we chatted about a little earlier, mandatory COVID jabs for NHS and care home staff. James Miller, I got a sense of what you both thought a little earlier, but let me have another think at this. I understand care home workers would have thought when they signed up for the job, they didn't have to have mandatory jabs. The world has now changed. If they don't want to have a jab, is there an argument to say that's absolutely fine, you do not need to have the jab, but you then need to find a different job? If you are to work in a care home, this is the condition that comes with that on the medical front line.
Yeah, listen, the issue with knotty problems like this is that that's a perfectly reasonable line to take. But there are other perfectly reasonable lines to take, which is that, you know, bodily autonomy trumps everything else. And I think that's the sort of line that I think I would come down with. And I think the law might possibly come down on that side as well. That's the problem with this. The government is apparently going ahead with enforcing vaccinations for care home staff and launching a consultation on vaccinations for NHS staff. But this is going to open up all sorts of issues. The unions are against it. Like I said, the law might get involved. There is, I think it's, the figures are in the Times story. I think it's 1 in 10 NHS staff that are not vaccinated, and I think it's 16% of care home staff. So it's not a huge amount, but it is a significant amount. So, you know, it's one for, I suspect it'll end up with the lawyers arguing about it, as so often these things do. I wouldn't claim to have the monopoly on wisdom on this one, but it is undoubtedly a very knotty problem, and one that it's not going to be solved just by the government saying this is going to happen and then it's going to happen. You know, there's going to be disputes, there's going to be legal issues around it. So it's going to run and run, I think.
Olivia, just to quote you an extract from the Times, ministers are supportive. Matt Hancock has previously highlighted the requirement for some doctors and NHS staff to have the hepatitis B vaccine as a precedent. Is that a useful precedent?
I don't think it's a particularly useful precedent. I think the point of this, the point to me is that care home residents have been vaccinated, and the vaccine is 98% effective against serious illness with COVID. So they are essentially safe. Yes, of course, it would be nice if all care home workers wanted to be vaccinated, and that would give them a sort of extra level of protection.
So, Olivia, so just jumping in, why would care home workers not want to get vaccinated?
Well, you know, I'm getting vaccinated. I think vaccines are a good thing. I think that care home workers who don't want to be vaccinated probably don't want to be vaccinated for the wrong reasons. They might have misunderstood particular information or been fed false stories. But then we should be, you know, the government should be talking about doing a huge information campaign, should be really cracking down on the spread of fake news, not forcing people to do something to their bodies that they don't want to do. I don't think we're at that stage there yet. That would seem to be a real last resort for an incredibly emergency situation. And I think now that nearly 100% of all care home residents have been vaccinated, this isn't that sort of emergency, and those sort of measures can't be justified.
Let's carry on talking about jabs and move to Olivia's paper, the Daily Telegraph. On the right-hand side, Pfizer supply shortage forces jabs rollout to slow down. James Miller, slowing down is not the words anyone wants to read.
No, 24 hours after the 19th of July was set as the terminus date for restrictions on our liberties and all the rest of it. That looks extremely dodgy if the Pfizer jab is going to run out. Certainly those that have been paying close attention to the numbers have noticed a slowdown, which, exactly the time when we're supposed to be ramping things up to try, there's a race between the vaccine and the virus apparently, and now we're hearing that the vaccine seems to be slowing up, which is very concerning. It's undoubtedly bad news. Something's up. We're not quite sure what at the moment. Let's face it, the vaccine rollout has been exemplary so far. So you have to hope that on this one they'll also be able to turn it around in fairly short order. But yeah, a bit of a worry, and remarkable how quickly that 19th of July date already looks in doubt.
Olivia Utley, given this story, are you writing the 19th of July in your diary in pen or in pencil?
I mean, I suppose it's going to have to be in pencil. But what really annoys me about this story is it's only the Pfizer supply which is slowing down. We've still got plenty of the AstraZeneca supply. And I feel like the government has slightly mishandled that. I mean, I remember when it first came out that there was this very small risk of blood clotting for the under 40s meant that we were being advised to get the Pfizer jab, and we would be offered the Pfizer jab if it were available. But the problem is that we now can't take the AstraZeneca jab, we under 40s. If you want to take the AstraZeneca jab and you're under 40 and you understand that there is a small risk of blood clots, then surely you should be allowed to. But the governments have actually made that quite difficult. So it just feels like a sort of pointless bit of red tape, which is slowing down our vaccination. I mean, of course, it would be fantastic if we had more supplies of Pfizer, but we've got plenty of AstraZeneca and it's not being used. And if the 19th of July date is delayed for that reason, it'll be mad. I mean, the other thing is we've got enough vaccines, we've got enough people vaccinated, it's going incredibly well, there's a really high take-up. Let's not pretend that this delay is about waiting for vaccinations. It's the government just isn't putting their trust in the vaccinations. That's the problem. It's not that people aren't getting them.
Right. We're going to carry on talking about vaccinations and look at the idea of vaccinating under 18s. Continuing on the Telegraph front page, the headline on the left: no green light to start vaccinating children. James Miller, the article says Israel has begun vaccinating those aged 12 to 15. When you see pictures of Israel, life looks reasonably normal now. Why would Britain not want to copy that?
Yeah, it's a good one, this, isn't it? Because it ties together the previous two stories. It's a bit weird that on the Telegraph front page there's two stories. One, which the one we've just spoken about, which says we're running out of Pfizer for some reason. This one says that there's enough Pfizer to vaccinate all school children. So some sub has not checked the two stories against each other there. But yeah, America and Israel are vaccinating children, but over here it looks like we're going to wait and see how that plays out and consider the risks. I mean, again, it speaks to that issue around mandatory vaccinations, because there are ethical issues here. Do you vaccinate children because it is good for adults? And that is definitely a big question to be answered. But there's also the question of children's education comes into it as well. So you're not just vaccinating the children in order to reduce the transmission amongst adults, and particularly amongst vulnerable and older adults. You're doing it so that the kids can get a proper education, and that is really important. So again, it's unfortunately a really knotty problem. I know we're not supposed to, we're not supposed to.
This is the moral maze. It's not the papers. This is the moral maze, the News Channel edition. Olivia, just picking up on that, on James's question that he's thrown out: should you vaccinate children in order to protect adults?
Yeah, I think it sort of does come down to that, because why should children's education be disrupted? Children, on the whole, don't really get ill with it at all. They're mostly sort of asymptomatic. So the problem isn't that they're off school sick with coronavirus. The problem is that the government feels that it has to close down schools when there's transmission among the adult population, which might be carried by children. That's the only possible argument for vaccinating children, which does come down to vaccinating children to protect adults. And in my mind, that's a dodgy principle to be setting, to be forcing our children. They can't make these decisions for themselves, to be doing it to protect us. It just seems a topsy-turvy way of looking at things, and it doesn't feel like children are being put first, like they haven't been for quite a long time, if we look at what's happened with schools.
We're going to go from ethics to trade on